Thanks for inviting me, giving me this opportunity to talk about my paper. I'm so excited to be talking to everyone at the Nine Group. You're doing an amazing job. So, to give some information about me, I'm Marie. You can call me Marie. I'm from the Philippines. I identify as Tagalog. That's my first language as well. I I'm a late identified autistic, but I've practiced speech and language pathology for 7 years, and then um, after that, I got a scholarship to pursue a master in the UK at UCL and City University of London. My master there is about speech language communication needs in schools, advanced practice, and so this paper is a fruit of that master. So I'm funded by Chevening, which is a scholarship program for international students by the UK government. And I'm still part of the Philippine Association of Speech Pathologists. That's our local professional body for speech and language therapists, speech and language pathologists here in the Philippines. So, yeah, so I wrote this paper because we had this module in the program, the master program at UCL called Concepts and Contexts of Special and Inclusive Education. But I'm going to be honest, for the whole module, I was quiet the whole time because it is very ableist and very ironic because it's about inclusive education and yet it is not. So everything I've written about, eh, I wrote about, is like a challenge of what they thought. And the neurodiversity paradigm wasn't taught to me. So I had to it's like my own self-learning journey on understanding what neurodiversity is, what neurodivergence is, and at the same time learning that, realizing that, oh yeah, maybe I am autistic as well. So it's a long story. So, but yeah, so just to keep us all in the same page. So I'm going to start with what is ableism, right? So because I'm at the start, so the title of my paper is Ableism Stifles Neurodiversity and It Hinders Inclusive Education. So most of you will be aware of what ableism is by now, but it's good to have a definition out there. So this is a synthesis of the literature I've read. So ableism is the explicit and implicit systems of discrimination that gives a person negative evaluations or inferior status based on their disability or neurodivergence. So if you want to learn more about it or a more detailed analysis, Nario Redmond et al. Has um, a good account of it that captures the broader ableism and in a broader conceptual analysis that covers different types of disability, not just neurodivergence. And Bottema-Beutel, I don't know if I'm saying that right. It's more of avoiding ableist language that's geared towards guiding autism researchers. Um, so, so what is ableism really? Like, you will get a sense of if something is ableist or a phrase is ableist or a program is ableist if someone uses person first language, like person with disability, person with autism, because it um, uh, separates the person with the disabled identity. And But to be fair, that's what we here in the Philippines have right now. We still have this pervasive language around person first language when talking about people with disability rather than saying disabled people. And also in the education sector, saying that someone is special with special needs or special education, those euphemisms that's called special, um, which I will later discuss why this is ableist and why this has bad connotations. And then for describing autistic people, like when you say suffering from autism, at risk of autism, finding a cure for autism, these are symptoms of autism. Using that language is ableist because you are implying, you are indicating explicitly that autism is a disease that needs to be that is bad, that somebody doesn't want to have it. So to me, if someone describes me that way, I will feel very dehumanized because I'm only seen as a disease. And quite frankly, for most of my life, I've seen when I wasn't aware that I'm autistic yet. That's how I've seen it because I've had this. I grew up in an ableist society, and I had this ableist clinical training, and also language that involves saying abnormal language development or whatever development, atypical, even though those words have negative connotations now because it's seen as bad, inferior. And also when policymakers or researchers, educators talk about the economic costs or burden of disability, because again, disabled people are seen as uh, burdens to society, you know. And research in science, lots of research that investigate the differences between autistic and non-autistic groups, and these differences are misinterpreted as autistic deficits. Like when the autistic group, the autistic people perform differently, it's always a deficit rather than, hold on, these researchers are not thinking about whether um, what they see as a deficit or a problem. Um, what if it's also a problem for them, or the non-autistic groups are always getting away unscathed? They're not the ones being scrutinized in these tasks. Like when they design these studies, it's always on the frame of reference that the non-autistic ones are normal or good or not. They have no problems, even though um, they weren't tested as much as how they tested the autistic groups. So perhaps most of you are already aware of that. So that's some of the uh, the manifestations of ableism in society, healthcare, education, science, research, and everywhere really. It's pervasive. Now, what is neurodiversity? So, this is the complete opposite of ableism, of discriminating because someone has a disability, someone is disabled or autistic or neurodivergent. So, broadly, if you think about it broadly, um, neurodiversity can be understood as the diversity that exists within the human population resulting from natural variations in the human brain and cognition. There's a good line here by a neurodivergent philosopher, Robert Chapman, and he frames it as an epistemically useful construct that does not dehumanize and pathologize a person's divergence from dominant conceptualizations of mental functioning or selfhood. In other words, it's an open conceptual tool that we have because we need paradigm shifts to move away from ableist conceptualizations of human differences, different cognitive styles, disability. So that I think for me, it's an open conceptual tool. It's still developing, like anything is, any concept is, or language. It changes, it develops as long as we keep learning, the concepts that we have for understanding something changes, it improves. But there are some that stays. There are bad concepts there that still stay, which is ableism. But and then it's also important to emphasize that when we talk about, we as in the neurodivergent community, autistic people, um, wh- um, we mean that neurodiversity practically includes everyone, like those who identify as neurotypical or non-autistic, non-disabled, and not just the neurodivergent people, the autistic people. So there are industries there that misusing or misrepresenting what neurodiversity is, and you can actually tell by how they use the word and its derivatives. They use it wrong, like they use neurodiversity as if to mean as like it's a disease, or another euphemism like special needs or special education. To those industries, it's like something that's just politically correct, whatever that means. But it's not. We mean everyone, like every human is part of neurodiversity. So it talks about human cognitive diversity. So it includes neurodivergence. And neurodivergence, we mean differences and not deficits in mental or neurological functioning from what is considered typical, whatever that is, or dominant conceptualizations of being. So um, I'm neurodivergent because I'm autistic. Dyslexic people are part of dyslexia is a neurodivergence, as well as praxia, ADHD, and there's a whole lot more that can be under that umbrella. So mental health conditions as well could be under neurodivergence. And this paradigm, the neurodiversity paradigm, is still evolving. Um, as we try to break these bad conceptualizations that are underpinned by ableism. And for neurodivergent communities, for us, the autistic community, we generally prefer identity first language. So to me, if you I identify as an autistic woman, rather than the person first language, because identity first language is important in emphasizing how one's neurocognitive style is integral to one's identity. And to be safe, this is not a rule, because we're humans. Neurodivergent people are different from each other as well. So this is not a rule. The identity first language is not a rule. It's a matter of preference of the person. So to be safe, always ask the person how they want to be identified. So yeah, so far we talked about what ableism is and how neurodiversity challenges it, and how it helps us to think of better ways, of more humane ways of uh, living with each other. Now, so the inclusive inclusion in education historically has been ableist. And these are, I did some research, and because it's just when, like, I questioned everything. Like when I was in that class, the IOE, the Institute of Education, that frames itself as the number one in education in the whole world. But yet I didn't feel as though I'm included. And I felt as though what they're teaching isn't right. There's something missing. And the fact that I didn't feel comfortable speaking at all in that class says something about the environment that it's fostering. And um, I tried to find out why. What's the root cause of why don't I feel included here? I'm a professional already, and these are teachers who um, who are preaching inclusion, yet I didn't feel included. So I did research. So it turns out, like maybe one of the first people who developed special education programs is Gulliford in the UK. So this might be very UK centric, so there might be more in the US or whatever. But yeah, there's a seminal book by Gulliford in 1971 that discusses about how to implement special education programs for people, for children with special educational needs. And Gulliford said there that these are there's a need for exhaustive methods of special teaching for children with special needs, because these children have uneven development caused by their disabilities or environmental handicaps. So, pardon this language because I'm sure you're well aware of how it is back then. So, based on your reading, or yeah, but the way it's described, it implies that disabled children are perceived as deficient inherently, like it implies that they're so hard to teach, or they're so broken that you need to exhaust everything you can just for them to compensate to become normal. And then these words such as special, euphemisms like special, environmental handicaps, and uneven development, whatever that means, they now have become dysphemisms, actually, or euphemisms that are now more negative than the uncomfortable language they replace. So there's actually a study in the US where they surveyed people about disabled people and the general public about their perceptions when they when someone they hear that someone has special educational needs or is special. There's always a negative connotation. So I think this is a useful word that, and I agree with it. It has become dysphemism. It's like, why do you need to dub it as special? Like, is it so bad that you can't even say what it is exactly? So that's just my opinion. But and then there's also this model, an ableist model, back in 1983 by Wolfensberger, called social role valorization. Basically, it's a principle of normalization that aspires to enhance people's social images and personal competencies in order to defend people from devaluation. So again, the implication is disabled people are inferior inherently. They're already in a devalued state. And this leads to dangerous ideologies such as eugenics, the belief that what is perceived as undesirable human traits should be eliminated at all costs, including death. So the most of maybe you're aware, this is kind of in line with ABA, the principle of ABA, applied behavioral analysis, behaviorism. But I want to focus on that because I think within the neurodivergent communities, it's known that ABA is bad. It violates the human rights of autistic people or anyone who's forced to undergo ABA to train them to be normal. And then there's also the medical model of disability, which admittedly I come from this. I have a background that in clinical training, because being a speech and language pathologist in the Philippines, it's part of the College of Allied Medical Professions. So really, our training as speech language pathologists in the Philippines, it's patterned after the US, where the medical model is still pervasive, using these tools to calculate whether a child or a person is deviating from the normal population, even though that norm is always changing. It's relative to how you norm this tool when you design this tool, and just the concept of what is normal performance, normal language, normal speech is very hazy. And yet we have this uh, we have some power is vested in us because we are professionals. and I'm trying to move away from that. Yeah, so that's why this paper I wrote this paper as well. It's not just in education, um, it's also in healthcare. So yeah. But if there are ableist models, there are also better models of inclusive education that have emerged. So, um, like Oliver's social model of disability. So, to my knowledge, it's the first model of disability that's actually put forward by a disabled person and supported by this disabled community. So basically, the principles the social model is that it sees that it puts forward the idea that people are disabled not by impairments alone, but by society's disabling structures and systems. And this is important. I believe in the social model of disability, and the social model of disability came to influence the our current neurodiversity paradigms as well. And in the education sector, I don't know if people educators from Canada or the U.S. or outside the U.K. are familiar with this because this is biased because I studied this in the UK and um, I have more literature access there. So Swain and French are, I think, educational psychologists in the UK. So they wrote about this affirmation model of disability, which opposes tragic perceptions around impairment and disability and promotes positive social identities instead. So I think this is heading in the right direction because it's important to really accept that some things we can't do as disabled people or neurodivergent people, and it's important to accept who we are, and that if teachers and families and communities around them um, employ this model, then it's better to provide the support that we need and not just focus on the disability as a problem, just the problem of the child or something. And then there's also Farrell's four conditions to attain inclusive education. So these four conditions that Farrell suggests are needed to attain inclusion in education is presence, acceptance, participation, and achievement. So presence is said to be met when disabled pupils attend lessons in mainstream school settings. And then acceptance is achieved if the school staff and non-disabled pupils welcome all disabled pupils as vital members of their community. And then participation is said to attain to participation is attained when disabled pupils actively contribute together with non-disabled pupils in all school activities. And then lastly, achievement is attained when disabled pupils develop positive views about themselves. So kind of like the affirmation model. But then to me, when I read that account, to me, just it needs more work on specifying how disabled and neurodivergent pupils can be supported so they can succeed in their own right. Like it's not just about them feeling good about themselves, but also what about how they will perform in in other demands of the school. That's also respecting their autonomy, their agency, and how they will improve or reach their potential in their own right. So, out of to me, based on what I've found so far, it's Booth and Ainskow's Index for Inclusion. To me, is the most comprehensive model of inclusive education that offers more actionable ways, and at the same time actively rejects ableism, the framing of special educational needs, and instead, it also rejects the normalization paradigms because the index for inclusion instead focuses on identifying the educational difficulties stemming from the barriers to learning and participation that the disabled and neurodivergent pupils face in their home, school, and shared communities. So, in fact, it's like a whole living manual of on how to foster inclusive education, from values to the curriculum, and just checklists or questions that educators, the community, can think about, making education more accessible to everyone, really, instead of finding faults in the pupil. Uh, the 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 way to their way to the way the index for inclusion always ask like questions like this that I'm showing you from the figures from that manual, like how should we live together, like there's a, a figure here that illustrates, visualizes the framework of inclusive values such as compassion, sustainability, honesty, and then there's also an engagement with how to improve the curriculum, like when figuring or working with the curriculum, the school curriculum, like the question would be, what do we need to know to live together well? Like in contrast to traditional curriculum, like framed as mathematics, physics, chemistry, they're so abstract. It's more concrete when you uh, ground it to uh, what's really out there and how we live together. Like the lessons are under categories like food, water, health and relationships, communication, mobility and transport, life on earth, ethics, power and engagement. These are more concrete ways that will help students navigate how to live together as a society, as opposed to just saying history, geography, art. There's art as well, literature, arts, music. But yeah, it's more concrete, more accessible, um, which to me is a better way of teaching. But again, there are constraints, of course, like because schools have to are regulated by departments of education, the government. There are set curriculum, there are set curricula, but we do what we can as educators, right? So to me, if you have a chance, I can share you links to it, and there are free free versions of it lying around online. So yeah, if you're interested. So what do I want you to get out of this paper, out of this talk? Why is it's really why to realize why ableism is bad in education, healthcare, and society as a whole. So, as I mentioned before, when I reviewed the ableist models of inclusive education, uh, it's always framed as using special education framework. Uh, the children are perceived as deficient, and those models, ableist thinking assumes that disabled children are inherently devalued in a devalued state that needs to be normalized. Uh, and it leads to dangerous ideologies such as eugenics, like those industry driven uh, therapies like ABA. And then for in the healthcare sector, because there's the intersection of healthcare and education as well. Um, like for us medical professionals, like when we assess these children, and uh, it's automatically assumed that the child is performing poorly in comparison to their age mate or non-disabled peers, when these tools are really flawed, really. And to be honest, it's hard for my field to see this as well. But I'm trying my best to really challenge these notions of normality in our tools, because really, when a child is diagnosed by a medical professional, that child or the person is seen as inferior to those who do not have a diagnosis, and that's not contained in the healthcare, just in the healthcare settings. It uh, it leaks in the education settings, in the society, and everywhere that person uh, participates in. And really, ableist thinking is blind to systemic problems, because ableism assumes that the person is the problem. It places the sole responsibility to the individual. But what about the social and systemic environments? Like, uh, we don't exist on our own. Like, we are all related. Everything is interdependent. And yet, when it comes to disability, neurodivergence, the problem is also always pinned on the person or the individual. And because it's pervasive, it's everywhere. It's in the Philippines, in the UK, in the US. It's everywhere, really. Because of capitalism, neoliberalism, industrialization, modernization. Um, it's actually systemic ableism, and that leads to internalized ableism. Because it's pervasive. That to me, I used to have so much internalized ableism in me that I thought I was in the wrong, and that forced me to mask my autism, and that didn't go well. I ended up uh, being severely depressed because I wasn't being myself, my authentic self, and really all of us, even us neurodivergent people, we all have some form of internalized ableism. And because abilities and disabilities vary from person to person, and we wouldn't know um, ableism. If someone is ableist, they wouldn't know they're being ableist because they're not aware of the form of disabilities or neurodivergence that the person has. But I think what's important is for us to always be critical of ourselves. Uh, Try to be more understanding and widen our perspective about other people. So yeah, so there's an open question here. So with everything that I've discussed, how do we move forward? Because obviously the solution is different for depending on your context. It's different in the Philippines, or in different areas in the Philippines. Different there are different problems and solutions that could be fitting for Canada, the US, the UK. So uh, yeah, feel free to ask me questions. Yeah, how do we move forward? How do we live together better?
Wow. Marie, that was just I know it's hard when you go to present something and you're meeting so many new people. It's very hard. You did an amazing job of just going through the chronology, the research that's out there, and really challenging thinking. And I know you kept saying throughout, in the Philippines and during my practice and but honestly, what I heard was pretty much aligned with what happens in Canada. And I mean, we can only speak from our own experiences, but I know, that's a big challenge for us in the educational sector, and I know also in the medical sector, because we are still firmly based in the medical model of disability, and there's certainly a push for the social model, but it is really um, coming from advocacy groups and people who are trying to stand up. And I think that's where the Nine has really tried to leverage this global movement in what we're doing, because by reaching out to people like yourself, we have Sophia here who is in Scotland, and like, we have members now around the world working together to put these ideas together so we can understand what is the direction to go. So I can't thank you enough for allowing us to record this as well. My mind is just, I mean, these are all things that we're thinking about in the autistic and neurodivergent community, right? But to have it now encapsulated is a really powerful tool. Even during the presentation, there were people asking, like, can I share this after? Like, it will be on the YouTube channel for 9 with your permission. And so it's very exciting because I think to have somebody who is in the medical profession who is also autistic and identifies as such, that's the connections that we need, right? We need to keep bringing these connections together, bringing fields together, bringing perspectives together. And I know that many autistic researchers and educators and people in different, whether it be speech and language or OTs or psychologists, psychometrists, are all trying to put their heads together, but it's a bit of an uphill battle. And so this will be an excellent tool, which I know will be very useful for years to come. I see Lisa has a question, and if it's okay, Lisa, are you okay if we continue the recording? Because I just think this is very powerful, and we can always edit it after, but if you don't mind, that would be excellent. Okay, go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you so much for sharing. As a speech pathologist, I am thrilled to hear your information, and I find it so valuable to listen to you. And we are, as a department, trying to move forward. There are lots of discussions. A question I had was, when we're interacting with educators and parents, I think the first step is really education, and not just coming from me trying to explain it in my terms. And especially, I identify as neurotypical, and so I don't have that depth of insight. Do you have any recommendations for very parent-friendly and educator-friendly sources of information, or is there something that you provide that helps with that first step in understanding, which I think is so critical in moving forward?
Yeah, that's a very important question, because us speech language pathologists being part of the medical field, we're bombarded with jargon, right? That's our language, and it's hard to make it accessible to parents. But there are resources out there. One of them. There's also I haven't tried practicing yet, because I'm still in grad school now. But these things, the advocacies, or what I'm doing now is like a tool. I hope it's accessible enough. I try to not put on some jargon in my presentation, in my paper as well. But there are therapists, neurodiversity collectives out there that are led by, do you know,
Yeah, the
Julie,
therapist.
Julie something.
Well, and so
Different
you
roles.
mentioned the therapist, and Lisa, I know you're familiar with them, the Therapist Neurodiversity Collective, which Kieran Rose started, right? And that's definitely one that we recommend as well. Julie, I'm not sure is Julie a member of the Therapist Neurodiversity Collective?
Yeah, she
Yeah,
is.
there you go.
Yeah.
So what we'll do is when we put this in YouTube, and we'll put it as our resources, we'll find those names and we'll put some of those links with it, so that way we have some resources there as well. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I agree, that's an excellent resource.
But also the index for inclusion one, the one that I showed you, that's a very good resource to me. I mean, I haven't applied it yet, but if I go back to practice again, it's a very good manual. I'll share links with you later.
Thank you. That's so wonderful. So if anybody else has questions that they would like to add to the chat, or if you want to ask verbally with mouth speak, that's fine too. And if you are not comfortable with the recording, like I said, I can edit it out afterwards, but it would be good to have it for transcript purposes at least. I think about that, tied to what Lisa was saying. we're trying to really help families navigate the difference between the messaging that they're getting from, the initial diagnostician, whoever that may be, and then, some are reaching out to, in our case, the autistic community, but most of the time, the barriers to that is they're not directed to the autistic community with the broad lived experiences. They're directed, specifically to sort of a prescriptive behaviorist approach. And I walk a difficult line here because I am in education. And in our province of Ontario, you mentioned ABA, and ABA is still embedded into some of our legislation. And so although people don't go around necessarily preaching ABA in education, it is part of, a diagnostician will make a report, and one of the recommendations typically includes reaching out and organizing for ABA to happen. At least that's what's been happening over the last number of years. I think there are more that are getting to be a little bit more progressive, but few and far between. So, like, what are your thoughts in some, yes, the resources are important, but in terms of if we were to give advice to, say, a parent or guardian who's got a newly diagnosed child with, with a diagnosis of being autistic. So they have an autistic neurology. They may have been told the child is with autism, like you said, right? The medical model. What's the first or second thing or first few things that family should do, in order to try and understand their child? I don't want to direct you, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, to me, if that happens to me now, well, actually, it kind of happened to me because my former patients still email me, because that's how we do it here, the informal networks here in the Philippines, and I send out these resources as I learn, and then I also share that I'm autistic as well. Like, I know that your doctor said they have autism and these diagnostic criteria from the DSM. And then I tell them I'm still studying. My research is focused on this. Uh, there's these tools that we have are not doing what they claim they are doing. Uh, it's pervasive, I know, but think of it as it's merely a difference. I mean, the society, it's really hard to give an advice, but to me, it's really personal. And knowing that, oh yeah, it's fine. I'm autistic as well, but I'm not gonna say that we're the same, because autism has different manifestations from people to people. Uh, but yeah, it's not the end of the road. With the right support, they can thrive. They can flourish. Yeah. So I don't have answers. Yeah, but yeah, it's. I still have so many things to unlearn myself. Yeah, but I've been privileged that I got this time to think about it and to change my thinking and paradigms. So it's a work in progress.
Yeah, that's such an important point. Thank you for bringing that up, because the internalized ableism that we do carry with us is disabling, and that's a part and parcel of being, raised in ableist systems and societies, and in our professions. Anyone who's here, our professions are medical model based, and so, as somebody who is pursuing this as a career while also living within this system that's still medically model based, it's very challenging, right? Because I think, and that's what I think drew me to your work so much. I know we met in a Twitter space, which people think like, what are you talking about, Karen? What are these Twitter spaces? No, people don't realize the amazing connections that we are making, because these dialogues are very organic and transparent. And yes, we do reach out and connect, and this is the real world. So when people say, well, you're not in the real world, no, it is the real world. We're just making different connections in different ways. And when we first were connecting, the Twitter space, I don't even remember the topic, but for me, it's the microaggressions, it's the ongoing ableism, and but also existing within the structure and trying to, you know, lead and be an educator while also thinking, how do I strategically disrupt, dismantle, do so in a respectful way, but also, you know, help people along. And there are lots of people that are active allies that are really trying hard. And like I said, a number of them are here today. I know a number will watch this later on, and we're certainly grateful to them. But it is exhausting, right, Marie? And
Yeah, it
I
is.
mean, yeah. What if I can ask, and I don't want to trigger you at all, but like, if you're comfortable speaking to that aspect, like how has the response been within your field, with other, you know, whether it be other students or other practitioners, in terms of you being like, are you openly autistic in those fields? I mean, you will be after this, so.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I am. I mean, I'm not like announcing it, but it's on my social media profiles. It's on my paper if they read it. And yeah, the first time my clinical mentor is also a big name in the local speech and language pathology profession here. Because they're older, right? It, he framed it as a disease, but yeah, yeah, maybe it's just like they demanded he demanded that really, how sure are you? Did you get a diagnosis? Well, I'm on the wait list for adult autism assessment in the UK, but it takes ages, and I'm not gonna pay for expensive private assessments, especially if these tools are inherently bad and gender biased anyway. And really, the tools that we have, ADOS, whatever the gold standard they say about them diagnosing autism based on the research of Simon Baron Cohen, Yuta Freeth, they're bad. They're just bad because it's really they just happen to be in prominent universities, Cambridge, UCL. Uh, they seem they sound right because they have the money to do this research, but really it's really biased. So really we don't have the tools that we have now in the medical sector. The DSM is bad. There's a whole area about the philosophy of psychiatry that tells us that how wrong the DSM is. So that's why I was drawn to philosophy of science, because I found refuge there, like really rethinking how we view the world, really. So and then going back to your question, like what would these the parents who just found out that their kid is autistic, I would refer to I mean, I know you're professionals. I mean, they mean well. They think that we these tools that we have that rely on normality, it, it's a sham, really. Like we don't know what normal is. It's just something that we think, that we idealized as a society because we want to be modernized, industrialized. We want to be productive all the time. You know, capitalism, neoliberalism, however you want to frame it. It's always economic productivity. Um, there's no such thing as normal, or you can define what is normal, but at the same time we need to live together. But then these power structures are embedded to those who are privileged, really, that got privileged enough to impose their ways, even though it's just one way of living. So there's no such thing as normal, if that helps at all. So frame it against this notion of normality, but at the same time, being mindful of you know, our responsibilities to other professionals as well. It's not meant to defame them or to bash them or anything. It's not their fault either. It's the system's fault. That's why ableism is systemic. So that's why I think conversations like this are important. And these parents, they share the resources to the doctors as well. And I think I've convinced one because it starts that way, just one person and then their networks. And then, yeah, it's the small things. It ripples. So the effect, the little things. It's the little things that we do really.
Absolutely. That analogy of ripples is one that many of us are using quite a bit, because every single ripple does matter. Every pebble we drop, it does matter. It really does. And I think your point about, normal. I was reading somebody was talking about the idea of normal. Typical in terms of statistical does not equate with normal, right? Because normal has this there's this idea that normal is valuable and good, and the proper way, the acceptable way. But really, when we think of so much research that's out there, it really points to the idea of neurodifferences, and that idea that neurodiversity encompasses the diversity of all neurodifferences. And so within that context, like you well said, autistics and otherwise neurodivergent folks are really just one or many different ways of being, diverse in terms of the global population. We're just variations of what it is to be human, right? And yes, there are neurological differences, but Damien Milton's research, which I love to share with folks about the double empathy problem. People don't realize it doesn't mean that it's not really about empathy, but it's about the fact that autistics, the studies showed that autistics communicate just as well with other autistics, if not better. Sophia will remind me, if not better, compared with non-autistics communicating with non-autistics. So it's really not that there's a deficit. It's that the ways we, receive information and process information and communicate with each other are kind of like that whole analogy of different processing systems, right? It's like a different, almost like a different language. And from my experience anyway, I know that the DSM and autism or autistic neurology, like, it's all a social construct anyway, right? These words are social constructs, but the differences are certainly there. And I think from my perspective, every time I meet someone who identifies as neurodivergent, there's a different way of communicating. Certainly closer with autistics, right? Like, we notice that in Twitter Spaces, autistic Twitter Spaces, it's very cohesive. It's really fascinating to be a part of those. But yeah, there's so much that we need to learn and unpack and unlearn, like you said, right? And that includes all of us who have been raised in these systems. So I'm just going to read what's in the chat briefly, and I know we're just after 10, so I want to be, honor everyone's time. I know some people were expressing, Erica was saying it would be amazing to get the links that you mentioned to some of the graphics. Those, what was that one called again?
Index for inclusion, is that what?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I will say.
And I'm not going to say I'm embarrassed that I don't know that off the top of my head, but I'm someone who I'm grabbing stuff from everywhere and really wanting to gather it all in. And so I'm really appreciative of you sharing that in its detail, just introducing that to us, because it is it really sounds like a great tool. I can't wait to get my hands on it. And I know Erica wants to for her board as well. And Maxine was saying just amazing insights and definitely baby steps, right? Natasha was saying, and this is during the presentation, awareness is really important, and sharing what we know. Of course, we will get there. And Leela's reiterating, one person is a start. That we can change one person, and so on. And that's so true. I always say every conversation matters, every single one, because that conversation, I had a staff member who, she's not here right now, but she was very much into the summit things that were going on. And she said to me afterwards how she was just, after the summit, she was at the gas station talking to people at their cars, it was fascinating. It was like this this, you know, ignition that we've started, and I include you in this, Marie, because this is part of, I see it as just part of this ongoing dialogue. And so yeah, but absolutely one person to start. Let's see, then Maxine. Yeah, we need to continue to be leaders and advocates for neurodivergence and neurodivergency. Natasha, of course, agreeing with that. And Lisa, just reiterating, well, thank you. That was beautifully said, Karen. I can't remember what I said, but we need to reframe and redefine normal. And yes, unlearning what we had been taught. Yes, absolutely. And then, as my dog's trying to get in on the meeting here, looks like it's hard to get a physical copy. Okay, well, I think we'll be able to find out how to get some kind of at least a PDF version of that. Can you put it in the chat, actually, what the name of it is, so we can have it saved there? The resource that you mentioned. Yeah, or I can.
Yeah, index for inclusion.
And Erica's flagging index for inclusion. Yes. And Erica has flagged it to her coordinating principal. And if she can get a copy, then she'll let us know. Excellent. Fantastic. All right. So, so I think if there's any last questions or thoughts, then if there's not, rather, then we can conclude there. But again, like, just can't thank you enough, Marie, for sharing this with us, for sort of jumping on a limb, because it was sort of an impromptu, ooh, this is cool, will you come and share? And that's what we're all about with the 9, is just sharing and sharing ideas and building, right? Building and building. We have to keep this momentum going, and congratulations on a great effort with all of your work, and I hope it's being received well over in your area of the world, but certainly we will be sharing it here.
See. Right
You'll
now,
see.
it's still, there's lots of pushback. but yeah,
it's out there, and like, you know, we operate beyond walls and borders. So sometimes the momentum across the world helps to shift things in your part of the world, just like here, right? What's happening in the UK or Scotland or Aotearoa or you know, the Philippines, like, it's all interconnected, right? And I think in the space that we met in, there was someone there from Japan, and we were talking about, yes, like, let's just everyone come together and we don't need to get on I was going to say trains wouldn't work under the ocean. We don't need to get on planes to be in physical spaces for our ideas and our thoughts and our the broad diversity of the autistic and otherwise neurodivergent community to come together. We have to think outside the box, and that's what we do best. So I again, just thank you so much for sharing your research. Really appreciate it. Yeah, no, you're part of our community, right? This is
I want to be part of 9. How?
You are officially part of 9. Are you kidding me? Absolutely. You didn't need to do this for us. You are absolutely welcome, and very excited about next steps. I know I can feel Lisa excited about next steps right now. I can feel that because like I said, every conversation counts. And the fact that we now have this as a really great educational tool, I think is a really powerful next step. So I definitely see this as just the start of a beautiful phase of our journey, and know that you're a part of making change. So even if you're not feeling it right there where you are, Jacqueline's welcome you, right? Welcome to the 9, such an important member of our team. Absolutely. We got to find more people from a variety of walks of life who bring the medical expertise, their therapeutic. The educators are not just in education. Everybody is in the business of education, right? So you are without a doubt a very important member of 9. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So exciting.
I will send this recording to my association. So I really
Yes.
need this recording as well.
Yes. Well, and you know what's neat is by working with people like, and I know Sophia, I think Sophia is still there. I can't see everybody, and Sophia may not be able to speak right now, and that's okay. But you know, just in connecting with Sophia, who's in Scotland, and Maddie, who is part of the summit, of course, who's in England, and Jorn, again, who's in Aotearoa. Oh my gosh, I say it wrong every single time. As well as people in the States and people across the world. Like, it's just, we can shift things much faster when we work outside of an industrial model. like I don't know how much more obvious it needs to be. And but that also incorporates the broad diversity within the community, because although people know I identify as situationally mute, although it may not seem so, none of us speak for the whole group. We are simply trying to ensure that all of the broad, diverse voices within the autistic community are amplified. And that includes non-speakers, that includes those with multiple neurodivergencies, those who consider themselves with high support needs, low support needs. And again, those are fluctuating constantly. So we're really here as a tool, right? All of us who have the privilege to be in education or in the special speech and language pathology in medical field, because we can use our power and privilege wherever we are to amplify all of the voices. So congratulations again. Thank you so much, and welcome to the 9. I'm going to stop the recording now. All right. Thank you so much.